I never imagined that the person standing right next to me on my wedding day, smiling in her pale lavender dress and holding my bouquet while I fixed my veil, would also be the person who was already sharing secret looks and private touches with the man I was about to marry. When I look back at the photos now, my chest tightens because I can see the little details I missed then. Her hand brushing his arm just a little too comfortably. His eyes following her when he thought no one was paying attention. At the time, though, it all felt so normal. She was my maid of honor, my best friend since middle school. Her name is Emily, and we grew up side by side. We had sleepovers, we shared secrets about our crushes. We planned what our weddings would look like when we were still just teenagers, scribbling hearts in our notebooks. She always said she wanted to be standing by me when I said I do, and I had never questioned that promise. It felt like fate when the day finally came. The morning of my wedding was chaos. The kind of beautiful chaos people describe when they look back on it years later. Makeup brushes, half-eaten muffins, curling irons warming on the counter. My mum was fussing over my dress zipper while Emily laughed and calmed me down, saying I looked like a princess and that she couldn't wait to see me walk down the aisle. I remember the smell of her perfume, jasmine and something citrusy, because she hugged me so tight before we left the house. It's funny how scents stick in your memory. At that moment, I felt safe. Like I had my best friend on one side and my future husband waiting for me on the other. The ceremony itself felt like a dream. The music, the flowers, the way the sunlight hit the stained glass windows of the church. I had a moment where I thought, this is it. This is everything I ever wanted. When I looked at Emily, standing there holding my bouquet, her eyes were glossy like she was about to cry. I thought it was because she was happy for me. I thought it was love for me. And maybe part of it was, but now I know there was another layer, one I didn't see until much later. After the reception, when everyone was laughing and dancing, I noticed Emily and my husband. God, even saying that word makes my stomach turn. Talking by the bar. I remember thinking how sweet it was that my best friend and the love of my life got along so well. I even joked to my mum about it, saying, see, I picked the perfect maid of honor. She loves him as much as I do. If only I knew how true that really was, just in the wrong way. That night, after everyone had left, and we were finally in our hotel suite, I looked at my phone and saw a text from Emily. It was simple. You looked so beautiful. I'm so happy for you. I smiled, I even teared up, and I showed it to my new husband. He just gave me a quick nod and put his phone face down on the nightstand. I didn't think twice about it then. But later, when I looked back, that exact moment haunted me. Because it wasn't just me she was texting that night. The first weeks after the wedding felt like a blur of happiness. We went on our honeymoon to the Bahamas, and I was so wrapped up in the turquoise water, the fruity cocktails, and the way my husband held my hand on the beach that I didn't notice the subtle distance in his eyes when he thought I wasn't looking. I remember lying on a lounge chair, the sun burning on my shoulders, and him smiling at his phone. I teased him, asking if work couldn't leave him alone, even on our honeymoon, and he just laughed and said it was a message from his brother. I believed him. Of course I did. Why wouldn't I? He was my husband, and we had just promised each other forever. I didn't know then that forever was already cracked the moment we said those vows. Emily checked in a lot during that trip. She sent me photos of our pets that she was taking care of while we were gone. Silly selfies with the cat on her lap. Even a picture of my dog wearing one of her scarves. I laughed so hard and texted her that she was the best maid of honor in the world. And I meant it. I thought she was just being thoughtful. There was never a moment in my mind that questioned her intentions, because Emily had always been my rock. When we got back, life slipped into its rhythm. The thank you cards for gifts, the unpacking, The everyday things like grocery shopping and figuring out where to put all the new kitchen gadgets we had received. Emily came over a lot to help. She said she loved organising and she'd pour us both a glass of wine and start stacking things neatly, while I told her how wonderful the honeymoon was. I can still picture her sitting cross-legged on my living room rug, laughing, her hair falling into her face as she taped boxes shut. She asked a lot of questions about the trip, about how he treated me, about what it felt like to finally be married. At the time, I thought she was just being a curious best friend. Now I wonder if she was measuring, comparing, imagining herself in my place. The first time something felt slightly off was during one of those nights. She had come over with a bottle of red wine, and we were talking late into the night like we used to when we were in college. My husband came home from work, loosened his tie, and dropped his briefcase by the door. I noticed the way her face lit up when he walked in. It wasn't just a polite smile, it was something deeper. He smiled back a little too warmly and then quickly kissed my forehead like he was covering it up. I laughed, teased him about how we were just gossiping. And I remember Emily reaching for her glass, but her hands were slightly shaking. I brushed it off. Maybe it was the wine, maybe it was just me overthinking. But that night, when I replayed it in my head before falling asleep, I couldn't shake the image of how her eyes followed him across the room. I told myself it was nothing. I told myself, don't ruin a friendship over paranoia. So I let it go, but the truth is, that moment was the first crack in the perfect picture I thought I had. And once you see a crack, even a small one, you can't help but keep noticing it every time you look again. A few weeks later, Emily invited me out for coffee at our favourite cafe downtown. The one with the brick walls and tiny round tables where we used to sit for hours after class when we were younger. She asked me about married life in that way friends do, leaning in, eyes sparkling, like she couldn't wait to hear every little detail. I told her about the silly arguments over toothpaste caps and who got the side of the bed near the window. She laughed so hard she nearly spilled her latte, and for a moment it felt like old times. But then she slipped in a question that struck me as strange. She asked, "Do you ever feel like he hides things from you?" The way she said it was casual, like it was just a passing thought, but I felt a knot form in my stomach. I shrugged it off and said, "No, not really. He's just private sometimes." She nodded quickly, almost too quickly, and changed the subject to a new series on Netflix she thought I should watch. It unsettled me though. Why would she ask that? Driving home that evening, I replayed the conversation over and over. I told myself she was probably just projecting from her own dating life. But a voice in my head whispered that maybe she knew something I didn't. That night, I mentioned it to my husband while we were making dinner together. I was chopping onions, he was stirring pasta sauce, and I casually said, "Emily asked me if you ever hide things from me." He froze for just a second, but I noticed it. Then he laughed and said, "That's ridiculous. What would I be hiding?" He kissed my cheek, but his hand lingered on my shoulder like he was making sure I bought it. I laughed along, but deep down the unease stayed. Still, I didn't push it. Emily and I planned a weekend trip together not long after. Just the two of us, like old times. We booked a cabin near the lake, brought wine, snacks, and board games. It was supposed to be about reconnecting, about celebrating this new chapter of my life while holding on to our friendship. I remember sitting on the porch with her that night, wrapped in blankets, sipping wine while the crickets sang in the background. She kept asking me what I loved most about him. I went on and on about how he made me laugh, how he supported my career, how I felt safe with him. And she listened, nodding, her eyes shining in the dim porch light. But then she asked me, "Do you think he feels the same way about you?" I laughed it off, told her she was being dramatic, but the question stayed in my mind long after we packed up and drove home. Looking back now, I realised that weekend was her way of testing me. probing to see if I suspected anything. At the time, I thought she was just concerned about me. Maybe even jealous in the harmless way friends sometimes are when one gets married before the other, but now I know better. That trip wasn't about bonding. It was about her measuring her place in his life against mine, and I, blindly trusting both of them, had no idea. The signs started piling up little by little, like puzzle pieces I didn't know were part of the same picture. One evening, Emily came over unannounced, carrying takeout from our favourite Thai place. She said she was in the neighbourhood and thought I could use some company while my husband was working late. At first it felt sweet, thoughtful even, but when I asked her how she knew he'd be home late, she brushed it off with a laugh and said, "Oh, you mentioned it last week, I think." But I hadn't. I remember standing there with the paper bag in my hands, the smell of pad thai filling the kitchen, and wondering why my chest suddenly felt tight. We sat on the couch watching a movie, sipping wine, and I noticed she kept checking her phone. Every time the screen lit up, she angled it slightly away from me. Normally Emily would show me memes, texts from her co-workers, even screenshots of dating app disasters. But that night, she didn't share anything. I tried to ignore it, telling myself maybe she was talking to some new guy she didn't want to jinx by telling me about. Later, when my husband finally came home, his tie undone and his hair slightly messy, I felt a strange energy in the room. Emily jumped up, too excited, hugging him longer than felt normal. I laughed awkwardly, joking that she must be tipsy, but inside my stomach churned. He looked surprised to see her, but not in the way I expected. It wasn't shock, it was something closer to guilt. And the way his eyes darted to me, then back to her, it burned into me even though I couldn't explain why. That night, lying in bed, I couldn't fall asleep. I stared at the ceiling, listening to him breathe steadily beside me, and wondered if maybe I was just being paranoid. I kept thinking about how Emily used to say, "If anyone ever hurts you, I'll be the first to take their side." The irony of those words made my chest ache. Weeks passed and little things kept nagging at me. His phone always on silent, face down, Emily mentioning details about his work schedule I hadn't told her. The way they both avoided eye contact sometimes when we were all together. Still, I clung to the idea that I was overthinking. Because the alternative, that my best friend and my husband were betraying me, felt too heavy, too impossible. Until one night, everything shifted. I was cleaning up the living room after hosting a small get-together. Glasses clinked in the sink. The faint smell of spilled wine lingered in the air. My husband had gone to bed early, claiming he was exhausted, and Emily had left her phone behind on the couch. I picked it up without thinking, planning to text her that she'd forgotten it, but the screen lit up with a message. His name, just his name. My hand shook as I opened it. The words were simple. "Good night, I wish I were next to you." My heart dropped, and in that moment the ground beneath me felt like it gave way. My whole body went cold when I read that text. I remember staring at the glowing screen in my hands, the words blurring because my eyes were filling with tears. For a second, I convinced myself it had to be some misunderstanding. Maybe a message from another friend with the same name. Maybe a joke. But deep down, I knew. My chest tightened so much I could barely breathe. I put the phone back exactly where I found it, as if handling evidence in a crime scene, and I sat frozen on the couch for what felt like hours. My thoughts spiraled. How long had it been going on? How had I missed the signs? How could they both smile at me and lie so easily? I went to bed that night and lay next to him, pretending to be asleep while he scrolled on his own phone. Every vibration made me flinch. I wanted to scream, to confront him right there, but I couldn't. I needed proof. I needed to be sure before tearing my whole life apart. The next day, I texted Emily, pretending nothing was wrong, asking if she wanted to grab lunch. She agreed immediately, and we met at a little diner we'd been going to since high school. She looked normal, cheerful even, like nothing had happened. I studied her face as she talked about work, about some new shoes she bought, and I wanted so badly to shout at her, to throw the phone on the table and demand the truth. But instead, I smiled and nodded, my stomach twisting with every laugh we shared. When I got home, I told myself I would watch them both closely. I became hyper-aware of every detail. When my husband came home late, I noted the time. When Emily texted me, I compared it to when he was busy. It didn't take long before the patterns appeared, lining up too perfectly to ignore. Once he told me he had to stay late for a meeting. I called Emily just to chat, and she didn't pick up. 10 minutes later, she texted me, "Sorry, I'm exhausted, going to bed early tonight." I wanted to believe her, but all I could see in my mind was the two of them together, maybe laughing at how easy I was to fool. My chest burned with humiliation. I stopped sleeping properly. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured them. Imagined his hands on her, the same way they were on me. Imagined her whispering secrets she used to share only with me. It was like my whole world had split in two. The part where I lived my normal life, and the part where I carried this unbearable suspicion that ate at me. I started rehearsing what I would say if I confronted them. I tried out sentences in the mirror, my voice shaking, my eyes red from crying. But then I'd see the wedding photos on the mantel, the smiles, the vows, Emily standing beside me holding my bouquet, and I would break down again. I kept asking myself how two people I trusted most could betray me in the deepest way possible. And the cruelest part, I still wasn't ready to let go. Not yet. I needed undeniable proof. Something that would shatter all the doubts and excuses I kept clinging to. The proof came one night when I couldn't take the uncertainty anymore. I told my husband I was going to spend the evening with my mum, but instead I drove around for hours with my phone clutched in my hand, heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. I ended up parking near his office, the one he always claimed to stay late at. I waited in the dark, my headlights off, watching the glass doors glow under the streetlights. Time crawled. At first I thought maybe I was being ridiculous, that he really was inside working. But then I saw him walk out, not alone. Emily was right behind him, her hair pulled back, her laugh floating through the empty night. They didn't see me, and for a second I almost wished they had. He touched her arm as they walked toward his car, and I swear the way he looked at her was the way he used to look at me when we first fell in love. My throat closed up, my vision blurred, but I forced myself to keep watching. He opened the passenger door for her, and she slid in without hesitation, like it wasn't the first time. I felt something inside me snap. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, fighting the urge to drive straight into them, to scream, to demand an explanation. But I didn't move. I stayed still, invisible, as they drove away together. That night I went home and collapsed on the bathroom floor, sobbing so hard I thought I might be sick. The cold tiles pressed against my cheek as I whispered over and over, Why? I thought about every sleepover Emily and I ever had, how she used to braid my hair and tell me I deserved the best. I thought about the promises my husband made on our wedding day, how he swore I was his only one. And then I thought about the two of them in his car, driving off into the night like I didn't even exist. The betrayal cut deeper than I can explain. It wasn't just about sex or cheating. It was about trust. It was about the fact that my best friend and the man I married had built an entire secret world right under my nose. For days I went through the motions of life like a ghost. At work I smiled and nodded at people, but inside my mind replayed that scene over and over. At night I lay next to him, my body stiff, wondering if he could feel the hatred radiating off me. Emily still texted me, pretending everything was fine, sending me funny videos and asking if I wanted to hang out. The audacity of it made me want to throw my phone across the room. I knew I couldn't stay in this limbo forever. I needed to decide whether I would confront them or gather more proof. And deep down, I also knew that once I opened that door, there would be no turning back. I decided I couldn't keep living in that shadow of suspicion, so I started paying closer attention than ever. Every time his phone buzzed, I memorized the timing. Every time Emily came over, I noticed the way she moved around my house, too comfortable, like she belonged there. One evening, while he was in the shower, I finally picked up his phone. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped it, but I unlocked it with his code, one I had known since we were dating. At first, everything seemed normal. Group chats with co-workers, family texts, sports updates. But then I saw her name. Dozens of messages, all recent. I opened them and felt my chest cave in. The words blurred as I scrolled, but I caught enough. Last night was amazing. I can't stop thinking about you. When can I see you again? He had even sent her a photo. Nothing explicit, but intimate enough to make my stomach twist. I couldn't breathe. My knees gave out and I sat on the edge of the bed, the phone burning in my hands like proof of a crime. When he came out of the bathroom, steam swirling behind him, I quickly placed the phone back and forced a smile. He kissed the top of my head, completely unaware that his world was seconds away from collapsing. I barely slept that night. I kept turning, my body rigid, while he slept soundly beside me. The next day, I told Emily I wanted to meet up. She agreed instantly, suggesting we go to brunch. Sitting across from her, watching her stir her coffee, I felt this rage boiling inside me. She looked at me with those same eyes that once held every secret of mine, and I wanted to scream. But instead I asked, "Is there anything you want to tell me?" She tilted her head, feigning confusion, and said, "What do you mean?" My voice cracked when I said, "About him." For a split second, her mask slipped. Her face froze, her eyes widened, and then she let out a laugh that was just a little too forced. "You're being paranoid," she said, sipping her coffee like nothing had happened. But I saw it. I saw the flicker of guilt, the panic she tried to bury under her practiced calm. That brunch was the moment I knew for certain. She wouldn't admit it, but her eyes did, and mine, full of tears, confirmed it. Driving home, I gripped the steering wheel so hard it hurt. My best friend had betrayed me. My husband had betrayed me, and both of them thought I was too blind to see. That realization turned something inside me. I wasn't just heartbroken anymore. I was furious, and I knew I wouldn't stay silent forever. The anger carried me through those days when the sadness threatened to drown me. I started keeping a journal, writing down every detail I noticed, every lie they told, every excuse he gave that lined up too perfectly with her sudden disappearances. It was like I was building my own case, brick by brick, because part of me knew that when the time came, I wanted undeniable proof. One night, I tested him. He told me he had to stay late at the office again, so I called Emily around 7, just to chat. She didn't answer, but 5 minutes later she texted me. "So sorry, already in bed?" Today was exhausting. My blood boiled. I knew where she was. At that moment, I decided to follow through with something I had only imagined before. I drove toward his office, my hands trembling on the wheel. My heart pounded so loudly it drowned out the sound of the radio. I parked across the street and waited, my eyes fixed on the door. It was almost eerie how predictable they had become. Around 9 he appeared, and right behind him, Emily, laughing softly, brushing her hair back the way she always did when she was flirting. They didn't see me, and I snapped a photo with my phone, my hands shaking so badly the picture came out slightly blurry. But it was enough. It was proof. My chest burned as I sat there, watching them climb into his car. I couldn't stop picturing all the times Emily had hugged me, all the nights we stayed up talking about our futures, and now she was stealing mine. The drive home felt endless. My mind kept replaying the vows he had said, how Emily had stood beside me, holding my bouquet, smiling as if she were the happiest for me. I thought about how, in that moment, she might have already been his lover. When I walked into my house that night, everything felt tainted. The couch where we watched movies, the kitchen where we cooked together, the bed where he kissed me goodnight. It all felt like a stage where they played me for a fool. He came home later, smelling faintly of her perfume, and I almost gagged. But I didn't say anything, not yet, because I knew I needed to plan. I needed to decide how this story would end. Would I expose them publicly? Would I leave silently? Or would I make them both feel even a fraction of the pain they had inflicted on me? That night, staring at the ceiling while he slept beside me, I realised something. For the first time since it all began, I wasn't just the victim. I was holding the truth, and with it, I had power. Once I realised I held the power, my fear slowly began to turn into something sharper, something almost cold. I started rehearsing not just what I would say, but how I would say it, how I would look them both in the eye and strip away every lie they had built. I wanted them to feel the weight of their betrayal. I wanted them to know I wasn't the fool they thought I was. But I also knew I couldn't rush. Timing mattered, so I let them think I was still blind. I played my role, smiling at dinners, texting Emily back like nothing was wrong, kissing my husband goodnight while memorising every detail of his excuses. Every time he slipped up, every time she hesitated in her stories, I filed it away in my mind. There was one night in particular that almost broke me. Emily came over for girls' night. We ordered pizza, opened a bottle of wine, and put on some old rom-com we'd seen 100 times. But the whole time I felt like I was sitting next to a stranger. She laughed at the jokes, she asked me about work, but I couldn't shake the image of her in his car. The way she leaned toward him, the softness in her eyes that used to be reserved for me when she was listening to my secrets. When she went to the bathroom, her phone lit up on the table. My husband's name. A simple message, miss you already. My breath caught in my throat. I stared at the screen until my hands went numb. When she came back, I forced a smile so tight it hurt my cheeks. I wanted to throw the phone in her face and scream, but instead I poured more wine and pretended nothing was wrong. Inside, though, I felt myself hardening. The version of me that once believed in friendship, loyalty, and love was gone. What remained was someone ready to burn it all down if I had to. That night, after she left, I sat on the floor of my bedroom with the photo I had taken of them outside his office. I held it up next to the memory of her text glowing on the screen and thought, this is enough. It wasn't just suspicion anymore, it was fact, proof. They had chosen each other behind my back, and now it was my turn to choose what came next. And for the first time in weeks, I slept. Not peacefully, but with purpose. Because I knew the confrontation was coming, and I would make sure neither of them forgot it. The day I finally confronted them is burned into my memory like a scar. I chose a Saturday, when I knew neither of them could hide behind excuses about work. I invited Emily over for brunch, telling her I missed our time together, and I told my husband to stay home because I wanted us all to relax for once. My hands shook as I cooked, flipping pancakes that burned at the edges, the smell of coffee filling the kitchen, while my stomach twisted into knots. When Emily arrived, she hugged me like she always did, so casually, so warmly, as if she hadn't been destroying my life piece by piece. My husband came downstairs in sweatpants, hair messy, playing the part of the relaxed weekend husband. For a moment, I thought I might chicken out, that I might let the charade continue. just to avoid the explosion that was about to happen. But then I looked at both of them, laughing, pouring syrup, acting like we were some happy little trio. And something inside me snapped. I pulled my phone from my pocket and laid it on the table. The photo of them outside his office glowing on the screen. The room went silent. Emily's fork froze halfway to her mouth, and my husband's face drained of colour. I said nothing at first, just watched them squirm. Finally I asked, "How long?" My voice was steady, colder than I expected. Neither of them spoke. The silence stretched so long it felt like the walls themselves were listening. Finally, Emily whispered, "I'm sorry," her eyes filling with tears. My husband reached for my hand, but I pulled it away like his touch burned. "Don't," I said sharply, and he froze. The lies began spilling out, excuses, half-truths, claims that it just happened and didn't mean anything. I sat there watching them both scramble to rewrite reality, and I felt almost detached, like I was watching someone else's life unravel. But when Emily tried to say she never meant to hurt me, I laughed. It wasn't a nice laugh. It was bitter, broken. "You were my maid of honour," I said, my voice shaking now. "You stood beside me while I married him. And the whole time you were already with him. Do you understand what that means?" Her tears spilled over, but I felt nothing. I turned to him and asked, "Was she worth it?" He couldn't even look at me. That was my answer. In that moment, I knew whatever love I thought we had was gone, replaced with something rotten that I could never forgive. The confrontation didn't end with shouting the way I had pictured in my head so many nights. It ended with silence, with me standing up from the table and feeling like the floor beneath me had shifted forever. Emily reached for me, her hand trembling, whispering my name like it was supposed to fix anything. I pulled back so sharply her face crumpled. "Don't you ever touch me again," I said, and my voice was so cold I barely recognised it. My husband tried to follow me as I walked upstairs, but I slammed the door in his face. I could hear him pleading through the wood, his voice cracking, promising it was over, promising he loved me. But those words meant nothing now. They were empty shells, and I refused to let them break me anymore. I packed a bag that night. Just a few clothes, my journal, the photo I had taken, and my wedding ring, which I slipped off and threw into the bottom of the bag, like it was just another piece of trash. I drove to my mother's house without telling him. The whole way there, my hand shook on the steering wheel. But there was also a strange calm in me, like the moment before a storm breaks and the air is thick with electricity. When I walked into my mum's kitchen, she didn't ask questions. She saw my face and simply opened her arms, and I collapsed into them like I was 16 again, crying over my first heartbreak. But this wasn't high school drama. This was my marriage, my best friendship, my whole foundation crumbling at once. Over the next few days, the texts and calls from both of them flooded in. Long messages about regret, about mistakes, about love. Emily begged me to meet her, to let her explain, saying she didn't mean to fall for him, that it just happened. My husband wrote paragraphs about how I was still his whole world, how he would do anything to earn back my trust. I ignored them both. Every ping of my phone felt like a dagger, but I refused to answer. I needed space. I needed to remember who I was, without their voices filling my head with excuses. I stayed in that silence. And for the first time in months, maybe years, I felt like I could finally breathe. In the weeks that followed, I realised the silence I had chosen was my greatest revenge. They expected tears, begging, maybe even forgiveness, but what they got was nothing. I blocked Emily on everything. I told mutual friends the truth. Not with bitterness, but with a calmness that made it impossible for her to twist the story. People asked her why she betrayed me, why she thought it was worth destroying our friendship, and suddenly her perfect image began to crack in everyone's eyes. As for my husband, I met him one last time, at a cafe near his office. He looked worn down, dark circles under his eyes, like guilt had been eating him alive. He reached for my hand, but I pulled back. I slid the photo across the table, the one of him and Emily walking out together. "This is who you are now," I told him, "and I deserve better." His eyes filled with tears, but I felt nothing. I had already mourned the marriage. That day I ended it. I filed for divorce, moved back into my mum's for a while, and then slowly started building my own space again. It wasn't easy. Nights were the hardest, lying in bed and feeling the emptiness beside me. Sometimes I missed the man I thought I had, the friend I thought Emily was. But then I would remember the lies, the texts, the way they looked at each other, and the sadness would turn into something stronger, strength. I started therapy, picked up hobbies I'd abandoned, even travelled to places I always said I'd go someday. That someday became now. And every step I took without them felt like reclaiming a piece of myself. The funniest part is that in trying to take something from me, they ended up giving me freedom. Freedom from lies, from betrayal, from the weight of pretending. I don't know if they stayed together. I don't care. They deserve each other in all the worst ways. Sometimes people ask me if I regret not giving them another chance, not trying to work through it. My answer is always the same. Trust, once broken like that, is gone forever. And I'd rather be alone and honest than with someone who smiles at me while secretly stabbing me in the back. This story isn't about losing a husband or a best friend. It's about losing illusions, and in their place, finding myself again. So if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Sometimes the people you love most will betray you in ways you never imagined. And when that happens, the only revenge that matters is moving on without them, stronger, wiser, and unshakable.